From battling near-fatal chickenpox to recovering from coughing up blood, UFC fighters have proved from time to time that there's nothing they can't do physically. Here are some UFC fighters who came back from severe illness. Starting with former UFC middleweight champion Robert Whittaker. Now, we all know Robert Whittaker is one of the best and strongest players in the UFC. He's had some pretty bad injuries. So honestly, I'm not too surprised that he came back from this illness. Don't get me wrong, this illness was pretty severe, but Whittaker is stronger than anything that the universe throws his way. Right before UFC 221, Whittaker revealed some news about his health that made fans concerned. Not only did it make fans concerned, it also made them less excited about the event. Why? Well, because on account of his illness, he was going to pull out of the event. But you must be wondering, what was he ill with? Well, he told his fans and followers via social media that he had an infection in his hamstring. But that wasn't all. He was also suffering from chickenpox. Now, he's fought despite being ill in the past, but this time it was just way too much, and he had to take some time off to recover. After all, chickenpox can be fatal in adults. Even if the whole chickenpox thing wasn't as severe, he revealed that the infection in his hamstring had completely messed with him. In fact, he was bound to the bed for a few solid weeks, all thanks to that infection. But after taking those few weeks off, he made a pretty iconic return to the octagon at UFC 225. He was applauded by fans of the sport all across the globe for making a return so soon. Just like this next fight I'm going to tell you about. Former UFC lightweight champion Khabib Nurmagomedov. Even if you're not that big on combat sports and the UFC, there's no way you haven't heard of Khabib, at least once in your life. He's definitely made his impact on the world of combat sports, and all thanks to his incredible strength. This is just another and probably the best example of just how strong Khabib is. It was right before his fight with Justin Gaethje, which had everyone already talking. I mean, Justin is a pretty scary fighter, but Khabib is equally as fierce. So no wonder there was a lot of hype leading up to the fight. Well, unfortunately for everyone who was looking forward to the fight, it was called off. But why? You see, just a day before the fight, Khabib was supposed to get to Abu Dhabi for UFC 254. But before he could get to the event, he found his literal life being threatened by a sudden illness. His whole face had swollen up, and he was in excruciating pain. At first, everyone thought that this was just facial bruising, but they decided not to take any chances because Khabib knows facial bruising, and this felt like something different, something more concerning. So what was it? Well, as soon as they arrived in Abu Dhabi, he was taken straight to the hospital and admitted to intensive care. At this point, his condition was much worse than it was just a few hours ago, and his crew really began to worry about him. It was in the hospital that doctors examined the fighter and found out the issue. He was diagnosed with mumps. Not only did he have massive swelling and really bad fatigue, he also had a really high fever for over 5 days. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that sounds like a nightmare to me. He had to stay in the hospital for 5 days while the doctors and staff helped him recover. The fight was postponed, and Khabib started training for the fight again. But this didn't go very well either. He ended up fracturing his big toe and thumb because of his slowed immune system after the illness. But luckily for his fans, he returned to the octagon soon after recovering, and boy, did he come back with a bang! Despite going through all of that, he was the one that won the fight against Gaethje in the second round. Now, that's what you call an iconic comeback. Just like the time when this next fighter returned after being severely ill. Yep, I'm talking about the former UFC heavyweight champion, Brock Lesnar. Now this is one good story to tell, so hold on tight as I tell you about Lesnar's iconic comeback. Brock Lesnar is someone who doesn't really need a long introduction. You all know who he is, even if you don't watch the sport. He has proven from time to time that he's truly one of the strongest men in the sport. It was right after he won against Frank Mir at UFC 100 when the symptoms of his illness started to become more obvious. His crew and the fighter himself had no idea what they were about to face and thought this wasn't going to get that serious. But despite all that, they decided to get it all checked out by a doctor. What the doctor revealed not only shocked Lesnar and his team, but the whole UFC world. The fighter was diagnosed with something called diverticulitis, And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's an intestinal illness that can be potentially fatal. This illness caused his large intestinal walls to swell up and cause other complications in his gut. Along with that, he was suffering from excruciating pain. But despite all this, he pushed ahead and made a comeback before he was even fully recovered. He won his first fight after his comeback at UFC 116 against Shane Carwin. But that's not all. He had to see just a little more of the hospital. Here's what happened next. After this fight, he obviously didn't feel all that great because he hadn't recovered completely from the illness. However, he decided this was finally time that he took just a little break and focused more on his recovery. And that's what he did. After this period, he thought he was finally all good. But then in 2011, after he lost his title at UFC 121 to Cain Velasquez, the illness made a comeback, and much stronger this time. He had to undergo several surgical procedures in order to recover from the illness, and the doctors had to remove several inches of his colon to avoid any further complications. Yikes! That sounds bad! But again, as I said, Lesnar is one of the strongest guys in the sport, so he didn't let the illness hold him back. After the surgeries, he returned at UFC 141, but unfortunately, it didn't go all that well because he ended up losing to Alistair Overeem. But then he decided to return to the WWE and made quite a big impression on the sports world with his comeback, just like this next fighter, Khamzat Chimaev. This is probably one of the most recent ones that I'm going to talk about in this video. Khamzat has a reputation of being undefeated, and that comes after quite a lot of strength. And what else shows that you're strong than returning to the octagon after suffering a deadly illness? You see, back in 2021 in the COVID days, Khamzat became one of the people suffering from the coronavirus. Now, I don't need to tell you guys how bad the coronavirus was and how painful it could get. We've all seen it. He developed severe symptoms and even had to cancel his fight with Leon Edwards. The scariest part of it all was when he coughed up blood and thought it was all cancer-related. But thank God he recovered and made a pretty strong comeback later that year after scaring his fans by announcing an early retirement. And that was all about some UFC fighters who came back from severe illness.